next up, we have Rolando Couto Solano and Sally Akavai Nicholas. And the title of their talk is Untrained Forced Alignment as a Tool to Document Sociolinguistic Variation, Vowels in Cook Island Maori.
All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. We are Rolando Couto and Sally Akavai Nicholas, who unfortunately couldn't be here because of the time difference between Tucson and Aotearoa, New Zealand. But we worked together on trying to use tools from natural language processing to accelerate the process of documentation of the language of the Cook Islands. This has also helped us conduct community-based research and answer questions that come from the school teachers that are in charge of teaching the language and helping with its revitalization. There we go. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the language itself and documentation efforts, a little bit of how we've used natural language processing to help with the documentation of the language. We're going to focus on phonetic variation, and in particular, two aspects of the vowels, how they interact with glottal stops, and phonetic variation of this one vowel, oo, which sounds different depending on which island you're on, and how this is intermeshed with the general work of language revitalization in the Cook Islands. So these are the Cook Islands. It's an archipelago in the South Pacific. It's somewhere halfway between LA and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you can see that there's a bunch of islands. There's some that are fairly large. So Rarotonga has an international airport. It gets a lot of tourism from Australia, from Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are islands that are very small. Atiu and Mauke, for example. Mauke sees 6 tourists every year, whereas Rarotonga sees tens of thousands. So there are islands, the smaller ones, where the Cook Islands Maori language is still spoken by children. It's the L1 language. But there's the larger ones, Rarotonga, is you're seeing a displacement process where children no longer speak the Cook Islands Maori language. The project started with the work of Professor Nicholas, who is from the Cook Islands. She's from the island of Mauke. And her dissertation was the documentation of the grammar of the language, and in particular, the syntax. And something happened, which might be familiar to you all. She recorded so much data during the dissertation that she said she was going to spend the rest of her life trying to finish transcribing it. And so this is a bottleneck that we're all very familiar with, the transcription of data. It takes a really long time. It's specialized knowledge, and it's very expensive to produce the volume of data we need in other languages compared to English, for example. I was working in New Zealand, and Professor Tyler Peterson introduced us, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And again, Professor Nicholas needed this because she was working in collaboration with teachers on her island of Mauke, and in particular with a class that was being taught on Rarotonga that is similar to Aldi at the University of Arizona, where teachers get training in pedagogy and linguistics and so forth. And so they were being trained on the knowledge of the language. And they had quite a few questions of how the language worked, which was why Professor Nicholas engaged in this research. So much data that it was going to take an entire lifetime to transcribe. We've been working for a couple of years on trying to see how NLP can help with the process of documentation. One of the things that we've done is speech recognition. So as one of the presenters in the previous one said, Michael Running Wolf, so Dragonfly is one of the partners of Papareo, and they indeed use the model, the Tehiku radio data to train and crowdsourcing to train a Te Reo Māori model. We use transfer learning to use the knowledge of the Te Reo from Aotearoa, New Zealand to help with the one from the Cook Islands. It worked kinda. So our character error rate at this point is 31%, which means that out of every 3 characters, one of them is wrong. You can see that it works, for some phrases it works well. Eoti reira, and then it was over. It's transcribed as eoti reira, so one mistake. But there's some phrases where it still has a ways to go. E tapeka ia te puaka, and then the pig got tangled. This has quite a few errors in it. But we're getting closer to at least having something that can facilitate the transcription. We're right now in the process of transcribing several dozen hours to better train these models. We've also worked with parsing and syntax, in particular part-of-speech tagging, where we've reached an accuracy of about 92%. This is the process of taking a sentence like "Kua aere ki au ki Rarotonga," I went to Rarotonga, and for the computer to know that this is the verb, Rarotonga is a noun, and so forth. And we have used this program, by the way, in the teacher training classes as a sort of way for them to quiz themselves when they're learning what the parts of speech are for the language. So this one is online, and we have been able to get it to work fairly well. So these islands, as you'd expect from an archipelago, had a lot of language variation. There's a lot of differences in the words between them, but there's also phonetic variation. And the teachers have told us that they can hear a lot of differences amongst the islands, but we have had little chance to do research on them. So we need a way to do this rapidly, which is where this technique comes in, which is called forced alignment. In forced alignment, you get an audio signal and a transcription at the word level. So for example, the signal 1, 2, 3, and the words 1, 2, 3. And the computer attempts to align the words in the audio signal with the transcribed words, and then figure out where each of the phonemes is. In English, with enough data, this has very good accuracy. And William Leboeuf, for example, used it in his research and reports that this accelerates research about 30 times. So it's 30 times faster to do phonetic research using this than extracting data by hand. And just as a very quick summary, it works by scanning the spectrogram and then extracting data from the spectrographic window and trying to figure out, is what I'm seeing here a k, an a t? Once it has a sequence of possible sounds, it then passes that to a dictionary to check two things. First, that what I heard actually exists as a possible English word, cat, for example. And to figure out the orthography, that it should output a C-A-T when it hears this. So again, this works in English because there's so much data for training. What we did is try to use its knowledge of English phonology to decipher the phonology of Cook Islands Maori. Essentially teach it Cook Islands Maori words as if they were strange English. So you have a sentence like Kia ora tatou, hi everyone, and then teach the computer that this could sound a little like Kia ora tatou with sounds in English, because the K in English is very similar to the K in Cook Islands Maori, the T in English is very similar, and so forth. So this generates a very strange model where the computer tries to hear English words that sound like Cook Islands Maori words. You think it doesn't work, but it kind of does. For example, this is the word akara, to look. Akara, I'm sorry. If we have an error of about 6% in finding the center of words. So relative to its length, if the real center is here, it probably centered somewhere around there. For vowels, the error is between 16 and 31%. As you can see in this final A, the tagging of the A is a little bit off with what we'd actually expect. So it says the center is here when it should actually be probably around here. So it produces a transcription, a level of alignment that is acceptable, fairly acceptable, and fairly easy to hand correct, so that you can then proceed to do your research faster. I'm going to show you two examples of concrete phonetic research that we've done. And after that, I'll tell you how we brought it back to the teachers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about vowels and about variation in the vowel. So Cook Islands Maori has a phoneme, which is the glottal stop. For example, in this word, ma'ata, I, you can see that it's a complete closure of the airflow, ma'ata. However, the glottal stop also has other manifestations. For example, it can be a partial closure of the airflow. This word means one, so it's tai, where you have a little bit of closure, but some air getting through. There are two ways in which you can completely lose the closure. You can lose the closure, but have some of the creakiness left behind as a cue to the glottal nature of the phoneme, tai. Or you can just lose the whole thing, tai. On many islands, there is a minimal pair. There are minimal pairs between words with and without the glottal stop, such as tai, one, and tai, in the direction of the sea. But there were teachers on one of the islands called the Tiu that kept saying, we can't hear it, like it's not there. What do you mean these two are different? So basically they asked us to if we could shed any light on what was happening. We used this technique to analyze about 470 glottal stops. We hand-corrected those, and then we quickly hand-corrected about 4,000 vowels to try to analyze this more closely. First, let's talk about the consonant itself. As you can see here, complete closure means that the glottal stop was realized with a full closure of the air. Creaking closure means that there was some closure, but still some air coming out. And no closure can either mean that there's some phonation left behind, or there's nothing, but all of the air got through. On Mauke, most of the glottal stops are like archetypical glottal stops with a complete closure. But in some places like Atiu, most of the phonological glottal stops are not there. Maybe the teachers are right, and this is not a phoneme that they use anymore. We then looked at the vowel after the glottal stop. So maybe there was some creakiness left behind, maybe there was nothing and it was fully lost. The third bar here is a syllable, is the vowel from a syllable where you have a glottal stop and then the vowel. And what this graph is measuring is something called spectral tilt. If you have a very negative number, it means that your vowel is creakier. Ah. If you have a positive number, it means that it's breathier. And if you're close to 0, it means that your vowel is modal, just a regular ah. If you have a syllable with a glottal stop and the vowel, the median spectral tilt is about 0. So it's a fairly modal vowel. So for example, if you have a vowel that was preceded by any consonant, a T, a K, anything that was not glottal, you get a little bit more creaky voice. But the most creak, you get that when you had an original phonological glottal stop and then you lost it. So you get something like die, for example, for the word for one, where you have no closure, but the creakiness was left behind. So we had evidence, thanks to this, that indeed, it's not that the phoneme is getting lost, it's that the phoneme is being transformed. The contrast in where in most islands is tai, tai, is becoming a contrast in phonation. Tai, tai. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So this was something that we could figure out relatively quickly in 1 or 2 months because we managed to extract the data so quickly. We also wanted to see more about the vowels because when the data is recorded, people always say that they hear the vowels in certain ways. We get a lot of alternation in many of the sounds. So we focused on really, in hand correcting really closely, about 1,300 of the vowels. And we looked at the 5 phonemes that it has, A, E, I, O, U. And I'm going to show you results only from the short vowels for now. This is a vocalic triangle for 5 of the islands, but I split it into 2. Let's focus on the U for now. These are from Atiu and Mauke. Again, 2 of the islands that are very small and get almost no visitors. The U is kind of where we would expect it in an archetypical IPA position, just back and above the O. However, look at what happens on some of the other islands, on Aitutaki, Mangai, and Rarotonga. The U is fronted. It's in an almost central position, and it's a little bit lower than what we would expect it. So in these 3 islands, the U is kind of like pulled to the front. And by the way, the position for the U that has been described in like his historical descriptions of the language is probably closer to this one. So is there a change that's happening in these islands? Our hypothesis is that it might be, and it might be due to language contact. So this one is Rarotonga, which is absolutely beautiful, as you can see. And this one is Aitutaki, which both of these get a lot of tourism. And most of this tourism comes from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and from Australia. And in New Zealand, for example, the phoneme U is becoming more centralized. There's this process similar to North American English, where you get moon, for example. Our hypothesis for now is that maybe this large amount of language contact, which is in part also responsible for the language shift that we're seeing in Rarotonga, is the one that's pulling the dialect of these islands in this direction. And by the way, to be honest, we do not know what's happening with Mangaya yet. If people have hypotheses, please let us know. So one final thing. Correcting the data takes a long time. Extracting it can be done in a couple of days, but then correcting it takes a lot of time and patience. Are we up to a point where we can just use the automated data without correction? Almost. It depends on how much data you have. So for the islands where you have more data, for example, in Rarotonga and Aitutaki, here we display the corrected vowels and the not corrected vowels, the uncorrected ones that were just spit out by the system automatically. As you can see, these two are virtually identical. We could have just used the uncorrected ones. When you have less data, for example, in Mangaya and Mauke, where we have less than 200 samples for all the vowels, we do get more differences. So if you have more data, you can probably use the uncorrected version and it would still give you similar results. You can get quick results. So we have two pieces of phonetic research that we could do because we got this data rapidly by bootstrapping on an English model to help us decipher Cook Islands Maori data. Throughout the research, we have tried to follow a community-based research model where, Dr. Nicholas is from the Cook Islands, is a research from there, and her research questions and the research questions of this project have been generally sprung from the language teachers, the people who are working to maintain the language in the outer islands and to help revitalize the language on Rarotonga. They have been the ones asking many of these questions. And when we've taken them back to the classes of this Aldi-like project that they have on the island, the most exciting reaction, to be frank, was their awe at how complex and amazing their language was. They just kept saying that they were proud of how complex it is because obviously, and sadly as part of this process, sometimes they were being told that the language is simple, it's not as good as English, and that it makes it very visible how complex their language is. So it's something that they feel really good about. It has helped motivated them to use this knowledge in their classes. So this is one of the teachers who made, as part of her project, a song for the glottal stop for kids to try to have examples of how these two were different, even in the Atiu dialect, so that they could practice together. You can later watch it with the QR code there. So these results, they have had a real impact in how some of the practice of these teachers is carried out. So this is an example of a set of tools that have been developed using natural language processing that can help accelerate documentation and have a positive impact in existing language revitalization efforts. And in part, projects that have been carrying out through a virtuous circle of research questions emerging from the community, where the teachers, of course, are motivated to answering these questions because they're their own. And this helps not only answer them, but also continue and sustain the work where they are motivated to collect the data and the whole project keeps moving forward. There's a lot more to talk about the handling of the data, about the future projects, but that's the partial results that we're bringing to you for now. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rolando. That was great. And thank you for being mindful of the time. Appreciate it. So we have a few questions already, I see. Or I think so. I know Ilaria Cruz, I saw your hand go up first. Would you like to ask your question now?
Yes. Hi, Rolando.
Hey, Larry, how's it going?
Congratulations on your work. I have a real kind of a basic question to what you were saying about bootstrapping, as on an English model in order to be able to get, fast results.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're, and this is something that of course, these are, initial steps that we are doing with our languages. And so, coming out of a person that knows nothing about technology, but so the one question is, will it be really, will it be really expensive? Of course, everything is expensive. To do a model that, for our languages, like for example, in many, American indigenous languages, we have, supra-segmental features such as, tone and, pitch accent, like in Mesoamerica, we have, like Chatino has like, 10 basic tones, and Sandy and all of these things. Navajo has, some tone, some pitch accent, and Cherokee, Apache the same way. So, do we always have to be modeling, after these colonial languages? And why not, think about create our own, for our own languages? How feasible, could that be?
That is a good question. Let me go one step at a time. I've also been working on the languages of Costa Rica, which are tonal and which are, somewhere like 3/4 of the way to the complexity of what like Chatino has, for example, which is really complex. Transfer models work. I mean, first of all, we don't have anything to transfer from. Like in the example of transferring from Te Reo Māori out there in New Zealand to Cook Islands Māori, there is like the transfer worked really well. Like I performed experiments with transferring from English to Bribri, a language from Costa Rica that has tones, and it is dismal. I've tried to do it with Mandarin, which has tones, to Bribri, and it works even worse. As you very well know, generating this, what we're doing right now with Cook Islands and with Bribri and Jamaica and Costa Rica is generating just to transcribe data, because there's no data like data. And this is incredibly expensive and time consuming. And at some point, hopefully we'll have, the 30 or 50 hours that other research projects have. Like the transfer one I presented in the first few slides only had like 90 minutes of Cook Islands Māori. So it was very successful transfer for how little we had, but it's because we started with a really good base. Indeed. So I guess it depends on what we need it for. We can certainly, if we can, take this knowledge from colonial languages and use it to our advantage for once, for this, for the help in this one thing, then it's probably a way to start generating new data where the languages can just be trained on their own without depending on external things, which at least for us has been helpful, because otherwise there's no way, not only is there no way that the project would get started, when you are asking for funding, when you're asking for external support, like you always need to show them something. So it helps to have some base to start from. And I'm so sorry, Gus, how much more time do we have for questions?
We're still fine. We're still fine.
Well,
yeah, feel free
to be continued. So I'll let you answer all the questions.
Yeah, no, we'll chat more about it, Ilaria. But there are very limited, in some of there's limited domains you can transfer from. It not always works. And indeed, ultimately, it might not always be successful. Like I've seen transfer applied in just all terrible ways, and it just doesn't, for most things it won't work. It was just in this one application, because of the similarity of an English K and a Cook Islands Māori K, it does kind of work.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Great work.
Thank you. Any other questions?
It looks like Michael Running Wolf is the next hand up that I see. I hope I didn't skip over anybody. I think that's right.
I think Sam Prinz had her hand up, or their hand up. Did they want to go first? Or
I'm sorry, Sam, if I.
Oh, sorry. Mine was just a clap hand.
Yeah. Hey, I made the same mistake before.
Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Hey, Rolando.
Hey. Hi.
Exciting work. Yeah, so we have the same problem you do. Have you seen, we should connect number one. Number two, have you seen anything where people have been collecting like a large like IPA or phonetic data set to help transfer learning? Have you seen anything like that? We've been digging around.
It's been for Bribri, the problem is, as Silara said, it's like with the tones and everything, it's much more complex to predict. With Cook Islands Māori, it has fewer phonemes and it has fewer suprasegmentals, so it might help. I haven't tried a system yet that I've seen those, like Anastasio's makes, where you transcribe into phonetics, for example. Haven't tried it yet. Might be good, but at this point we have so little independent data. Like we're starting the process of collecting. Right now we've like doubled. We have like 3 hours of transcribed data, but this is still just the start of the project. And yes, collecting this takes so much time.
Yeah, we've been thinking about proposing like a project to do just that, like just to create a phonetic data set for other indigenous language researchers like you and us to use. But yeah, we should talk.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for bringing it up. And yeah, no, I mean, we have one thing that we still need to do is to make sure we align like all the data set collection policies with like Papareo's policies, and make sure, because they are doing an amazing job with handling the data, which, to be honest, on our side is always a challenge. Yeah, mainly because there's fewer people and the project is at a more inception kind of phase.
There's one last comment. I'm sorry, I don't mean to filibuster. I think what I've been looking into is a thing called data co-ops, which is kind of a thing on the mainland here in the States I've been hearing about, and in Europe. Look into it. I think there's been some interesting work around creating, like basically that's what the Hiko Media has been kind of circling around, this idea of having a secure data store that preserves indigenous data sovereignty.
That would be a good idea.
I'm not an expert, but I've been hearing about it, this data co-op, where people share interest in a data set.
And it's just, may I just say, I mean, and we should all be so thankful that the Hiku data is so thorough and there's so much of it. I'm so jealous. It's so amazing. Yeah. No, thank you so much for your suggestion. Any other questions?
Let's see. I don't see any hands. Just praise in the chat. Oh,
hey,
John Powell.
John
Oh,
has
there we
his
go.
hand.
Yep.
I thought your presentation was excellent. Thank you so much for talking about that. And I'm sort of thinking about my question in terms of what Ilaria Cruz was mentioning too, and sort of some of these challenges that you get with being able to train on smaller amounts of data. And it's, and I appreciate the challenges that you're confronting, because of course, as you mentioned, the sets that have the most data are the ones, the colonial languages, and you're trying to sort of make the best out of that. I don't know, this probably highlights a little bit of my naivety with computational methods, so pardon me if it does. I'm wondering if this is a possible solution that might be being entertained, but I'm thinking of like, the situation with, like Austronesian is such a huge family, Polynesian within there is there's so many languages, so big communities trying to, not the same thing, of course, but sometimes there's those opportunities for collaboration. I'm wondering what you think the feasibility might be to, if there, and of course this deals with going across different nations, different groups, and there's all those layers to that as well. But do you think that you might have a possibility of, like for example, a Polynesian data set where, because if you're trying to cross different language families and all those kind of things, it's not, training is going to be very difficult. But do you think that if there was a collaboration and, people sort of pulling together, their different data and so forth, do you think you might be able to achieve similar results that way? Or do you think that would also pose a lot of problems that you're sort of already confronting anyway?
I'm so sorry. Let me answer with one word and then ask Gus how much time I have. The answer is yes. Gus, how much more time we have?
We're fine. We actually have a bit of a buffer here, so we have some time for a bio break, but continue. I think
the key part here is probably doing it. Yes, Papareo is doing where yes, technically you can transfer from any human language. It will of course be beneficial to have it be a language that's closer. Here, so this case is a lucky one in that the languages of Polynesia resemble each other more than, for example, like Chatino is not very similar to other languages, even in the same family. And in Costa Rica, like Bribri and Quebec are somewhat similar, but there's very little data for either of them. So as for the technical challenges, yes, it is 100% completely possible to transfer from one to the other. And it's an active area of research on how to use knowledge from one language to aid in the learning of a second one. As for how to do it and who should have control of all of these, that's the one where good cooperation needs to be negotiated, where it's not just people sometimes try to do like, oh, this is a model that's going to transcribe every language. But in doing that, and not cooperating with communities, sometimes they end up with technical garbage because they use data sets that want to portray 1,000 languages, but they didn't ask any member of these 1,000 languages. And so they get data sets that are trash. And what you end up outputting is trash. So meaningful cooperation amongst the parts is going to be crucial, not just to making sure that it's sustainable politically and funding wise, but that it's technically something that would actually be useful. In this, yes, a model like the one that Dragonfly has is very good, where they would like to use to have models for other languages that were, because Tahitian is so similar and Cook Islands Maori is so similar. So that is one avenue we could explore. Of course, we're also trying to compile more data just so that it's better. So for the people who know the technicals, like the character error rate is 31%, but the word error rate is 99. So yeah, that's what we could do with 90 minutes. We're trying to multiply data by 10 so that not only can we provide a good project to the people of the Cook Islands, but hopefully that this can be used in cooperation with other initiatives in Polynesia where they can transfer from Cook Islands Maori to other languages that are close, like Tahitian. John, did I answer your question? I don't know if it did.
Yeah, that's excellent. Of course, obtaining funding from all the different various sources, crossing all sorts of different international boundaries, makes for an interesting complexity to it as well. But yeah, that's fascinating work so much.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Okay, our next talk isn't scheduled to start until 11:45, so I want to make sure everyone has at least 5 minutes for a bio break or something like this. But we also have 2 related talks so far, I think. So I wanted to kind of open it up if there were questions about the first talk or this talk and how they interplay. I know we had a few already like that. We do have a couple more minutes for that kind of discussion. No, I can kind of get it started. Rolando or Michael Runningwolf or Sean, have you guys seen a paper that is sort of comprehensive and looking at how to sample based on phonological features from various languages to aid in transfer learning? I haven't seen such a paper, but it seems like I know there's been a lot of work recently with these models and pushing for these models with companies like Hugging Face. But
I know that Carnegie Mellon is trying to make these models where they transcribe from audio to IPA, which is also useful if you think about it for languages that are not written, like that have never used writing. And so where there isn't a base for transcription to train it on, I can look. I know that they're working on this, but I can't remember the specific title of the paper. Let me see. Michael, what do you think?
Hey, Sean, I think Sean shared the link. There is some research around this. Like, I think the ASR world is circling around this idea of doing like phoneme-based research. Sean, are you there?
I don't think I've seen any papers that have, phonetic-based data sets. It's like, it's usually typically just kind of whatever orthography is used for the language. Like, Facebook AI's come out with a large multilingual data set, but it's
right,
primarily English, and it's all it's not phonetic at all.
There's a project called Persephone, which focused on tones. And Ilaria, aren't you a co-author of that? I think
I'm sorry. Yes. Actually, yes. They use a corpus that I created to test on that. So that's as far as I.
The output is in like an IPA-like representation, or is it not?
What do you say? I'm sorry, I didn't get that one.
Is the output like closer to phonetic than to the orthography, or am I misremembering it?
I think that is closer to the phonetic in a sense. yes, but it was just one, it didn't go that far, but it's to be continued.
I smell an NSF proposal in the works, but
yeah.
looks like
awesome.
looks like we have a question from Lane.
I was just going to comment. This isn't my work, but I'm at the University of Illinois, and I know Mark Hasagawa Johnson in the ECE department here has definitely done some work bordering on this space. I don't know if he has done the exact thing that you're looking for, but he definitely has related work that's very close to that space. I believe that he led a JSOL, the Johns Hopkins Summer Workshop, on mismatched transliteration. So using non-native speakers to translate or to transcribe data and then building models based on that.
God, I hope it works better than it did for me. We once tried that to crowdsource transcriptions by non-experts. We just wasted our money.
I believe he did have some good success with it.
Oh well.
Would you mind pasting that in the chat, Lynn?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Was there another question here? Oh, Caroline mentioned something in the chat here. I think colleagues at NRC Canada are also doing something similar. So. I believe we have a few minutes left. If people want to run, grab a drink or something and come right back, we'll resume at 11:45. But we can kind of open it up for general discussion for now, if you don't want to go anywhere.
Gus, thanks for conducting the session.
Sure, my pleasure.
More papers on the transcriber's IPA. I've got it somewhere in here.
Yeah, I would recommend emailing Mark. He would definitely have more information about citations.
I've got the misquoting Keone, who works on the the Maori project. That I asked him like they have really high success rate, high precision with their model, and like with the relatively low data. And I cite them all the time, and people ask me like, how are they able to do it? Like people in ASR, like doing Western languages, like they use thousands and thousands of hours of audio, and they have like a legion of data annotators, out there. And they always asking me like, how do they do it so? And I asked him, and I'm going to misquote him, and he thinks it's because the nature of Maori, just the structure of the language, and also there's less ambiguity. Like it's a mostly phonetic alphabet orthography, and so there's less ambiguity, and like English has a variety of ways to say the F, and so he thinks like there's just a lot of innate biases. And so like a lot of indigenous languages, we have synthetic orthographies, Napa, IPA, or whatever. And so I think I almost wonder, I am theorizing for myself that English might be the hard language as far as ML goes, because it's so irregular and erratic, and it's a pidgin language practically. Of course, I know there's a technical term for pidgin, but
I can't tell you that it's not a problem that's solved for English. My students in New Zealand constantly complain about Siri that it didn't understand them. So we think of these things as solved, but they're only solved for the people around Silicon Valley in
Yes.
California.
Yeah, I mean, you can go off on whole indigenous data. Like I did a small project using visual AI on the phone, and it only recognizes fire hydrants from San Francisco. And it's just so typical. Like when you start talking about bias in data or bias in AI, it's like it's everything. And so if you're an indigenous person trying to build AI for your community, like if I wanted to recognize sage, which is everywhere in Montana, it's also intrinsic to a lot of our cultures, it won't recognize it. I'd have to build my own model to recognize sage.